As US President Donald Trump continues to warn all from purchasing oil from Russia and says this really is the need of the hour to stop fueling the Ukraine war, we speak to Peter McGuire, CEO, AustraliaTrading.com, also someone who's been tracking the oil market for decades now. His first thoughts really on all of this and more. Thank you for joining us from Sydney, Peter. Thank you for your time. I'd like to begin by asking you, when Donald Trump, US President Donald Trump, is saying that, look, it's time to stop buying oil from Russia, what really does this mean for the global economy, for the global oil market? Your first thoughts.
Well, hello, Sakshi. I think a couple of things. First off, President Trump and the lens that he looks through is a different lens to probably every other country. And that's been demonstrated by tariffs, and the overall momentum is what he's after to do. In what I believe he's after to do is that he wants to cause as much pain as possible to Russia financially, and in turn, any country that buys any energy from Russia is going to be penalized. And he wants to see an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He doesn't want Russia to have more economic horsepower. He wants to actually cripple Russia. And I think that that's the overall theme of what he's trying to achieve.
Right, but Peter, what does this really mean for India then? India has always said that, look, they will protect the national interest and they will take their decisions independently.
Absolutely. I mean, look, and when you look at prime ministers and presidents, their agenda, one would hope, is for the betterment of their society and for their people. And I don't think you're going to have a better leader of what Prime Minister Modi is all about, and from the lens that I look through, is for the betterment of the Indian people. He's been able to structure a deal through his cabinet to purchase Russian crude, and there is a discount for that crude, which is a benefit for the Indian consumer. So that's the issue that we've got at hand, and President Trump thinks that is unfair, and he has penalised India naturally with tariffs and an increase in that tariff because of that situation.
Right, Peter, and also for those wondering that, look, what does this really mean for oil prices going forward? Then, what would you say?
Well, when you're looking at OPEC Plus, and I've got to consider OPEC Plus as the big elephant in the room, and certainly the likes of the US as well as a major producer. The talk in the town is that we're going to see naturally higher production numbers, which has been very much a part of OPEC's strategy over the last number of months, an increase in production. That increase in production is going to have one impact, Sakshi, and that is more oil in the market. We say that will happen by Q4, which is October. And then you're going to see, everyone is saying, a glut of oil. And that glut would be, I think, the framework of, if you don't have geopolitical concerns, you would expect to see cheaper oil prices over the October, November, December window leading into Christmas. That's what I think. And I think that will be the outcome.
Right. So going forward, we're likely to see oil prices ease leading up to Christmas, you say. Well, what does this mean for India then going forward?
Well, I think first off, let's see what President Trump is able to achieve from a Russia-Ukraine situation. If that was going to, and the fabric of that war, if that was to stop and you had a ceasefire or you had a truce, let's say that happens by November or December, then that would mean that, I understand, that India would be allowed to buy Russian crude if there is no longer a war in that region. So no one said to me, oh, well, hang on, you're not allowed to buy Russian crude from India's not allowed to buy Russian crude for the next 10 years. That hasn't been discussed. I understand it is specific for this warfare between Ukraine and Russia. That's the only thing that's really causing this whole concern.
Right. So for those listening to you right now, saying that okay, you're quite hopeful about things easing, oil prices softening. You do you really see that happening by the end of this year? Then.
Well, we're 3 months out from the end of the year. I think that President Trump is trying with a lot of, he's very patient. He's
Mm-hmm.
trying as hard as he can to try and get President Zelensky and President Putin to the table. And I think that I think what will happen, he will force them to come to the table to be some form of negotiation. And that's what he's wanting to achieve. Now, if it is done before Christmas, I won't be surprised. If it's not done
Mm-hmm.
before Christmas, I will be surprised, because I think that that's what they're trying to achieve. And that seems to be the general theme. And as we look forward to that, hopefully some sense can come into everyone and they can make this no longer a protracted war.
Right. We've seen oil prices really, settle lower. This after the Fed rate cut. So many saying that look, the U.S. economic concerns are actually outweighing the Fed rate cut.
Yeah, well, that's so true. I mean, you're talking about inflation numbers, you're talking about unemployment numbers.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain, I mean, some of the numbers that came out under the Biden administration, they're saying that they weren't, there was a lot of revisions that we've seen in the last matter of 6 or 8 months. So whether there's going to be further revisions as far as those unemployment numbers, and what is the Fed's policy going to be moving forward to Christmas? Are we going to see another 25 basis points or another 50? Where do we see? And the overall momentum of the stock market, you've had
Mm-hmm.
the Dow, the S&P, I think the Russell, and certainly the NASDAQ hit all-time highs. That was yesterday. I mean, it's a raging bull market, the US equity market, and this could really spur things on even further with dropping of interest rates, and that would naturally benefit the consumer.
Right, and if a trade deal is in sight, it will also benefit global economies.
Yes.
And of course, the oil prices easing further will do so as well. So optimistic there in the near term and the long term. Peter, lastly, do you agree, or anything that the world needs to worry about as far as oil is concerned?
Well, naturally, you've got weather outages. There's the first part as far as hurricanes. In the middle of the season we've just passed that. So you're still worrying about that impact as far as the Gulf of America and what that can do as far as disruption from a Mother Nature perspective. The other side, of course, is the great unknown, Sakshi, and that is geopolitics. So if we have a plain sailing without too much rough water between now and Christmas, and President Trump and other leaders are successful, then that's going to be a good sign for naturally the global economy. But if you have geopolitical tensions and anything really ramps up, then that changes the footprint naturally, that can greatly impact first the consumer, secondly oil prices, and thirdly, where do we see US dollar?
Absolutely. So, really, the spotlight on the oil market going forward, as well as oil prices. And, like you said, one must always be prepared for the great unknown that is geopolitics. Thank you so much for joining us from Sydney and for sharing your thoughts. And we will continue to track the oil market very closely. Thank you.
Thank you.